Alright guys, another day, another video. So in this video, we're going to learn about how to control access to members of certain types so that we can create encapsulation on an as-needed basis. So for example, what that means is I have here this repository related module, and in this module, the calls that are being made require access to a connection pool. Now that connection pool lives inside of this type, DB repo, and this function is giving access to that connection pool, right? Now this makes sense that this module should have access to this because it's obviously a repository and it's making access to the database. But how do we take that same type and disallow access to that member or any other member that we want to disallow? So for example, here we have a Actix web server and we need to set up the shared data. So we're creating that same repository. So we're creating an instance of it, and then we're adding it to app data so that it can be shared across all the various routes that are in the application. And then in turn, the routes are gaining access to that repository and then making specific repository calls. However, if you look at the rest of the function, a route really doesn't need to know about connection pools and what the database is and stuff like that. So in this video, we're going to learn a simple pattern to allow us to control the accessibility or the encapsulation of members so that we can hide data when we want to and we can expose it when we want to. All right, to start, let's take a look at this DB repo type that, as I showed you, is going to be the thing that is allowing us access to the repository at various levels. Now, if you note here, this is in the common entities base mod.rs file. So this is going to come in to effect later when I show you how the importing is allowing us to encapsulate data. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, of course, I need that connection pool. So I'm going to create this member that provides an instance of the connection pool. But if you notice, I'm not making it public, right? So normally, a lot of times we make our members public and then it gives us direct access to that particular member. So in this case, we're going to hide it. We're going to leave it hidden. And instead, we're going to give it access indirectly. But first, I'm going to create a way to give us an instance of the type, because obviously we need an instance of the type. So here we have our type. It can have a connection pool member, and then we create an instance of it with that member intact, and now we're ready to go. So then the way we control access to that is we create this getter trait that wraps a getter function around this. So we have our getter, it returns a certain type, and that type is going to be this. So then if we go ahead and we implement this trait, actually, before we do that, I'm going to make this an instance type, and I'm going to return a reference to my connection pool because I don't want to transfer ownership. So I just want to let people borrow. So we'll have a reference. And of course, our type is going to be the same type as our connection pool. And then we're simply going to return that connection pool as a reference type. So what do we get from doing this? Well, in Rust, regardless of whether we have a trait that is implemented for that type or not, the members of that trait cannot be accessed unless the module that is making use of the type is importing the trait itself. So in the case of this, now remember the function is called getCon. So in the case of this repository, we have access to getCon because we are grabbing that inside of common entities base, we are grabbing that trait and we're importing it, right? But if you look at the other code from before, if I try to access the same function, you're going to see that no method name, blah, 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 because we didn't import common entities base and then that trait, dbConGetter, right? So whether it's this code right here that again doesn't require any access or any knowledge of that information, or the lib.rs, which is instantiating our Actix web server and setting up our app state, neither of these two modules require access to that capability, that connection pool capability, and therefore should not have knowledge about the fact that, you know, the database is Postgres or we're using SQLx or any of that information. Really only the repository should be knowing that type of information, and it should be hidden from the rest of the code. And this very simple pattern controlling, again, the trait import allows you to do that. So that was it. If you liked the video, subscribe and like.